Imagine a world where the very earth shook beneath the footsteps of wool-covered giants, where entire herds, their tusks arched like crescent moons, roamed the icy tundras thousands of years ago. A world where, hidden in the shadows of time, the greatest hunters crossed paths with the most formidable prey. But what if I told you that this story, one you thought had ended long ago, might still be unfolding? What if woolly mammoths didn't just vanish, but were deliberately wiped from history? Or worse, what if they never truly left? Today, we open the door to a mystery frozen in time. A tale where archaeology, ancient myths, cutting-edge science, and long-forgotten hunters are woven together like the strands of a primeval tapestry. Get ready, because by the end of this video, you might start to question everything you thought you knew about the woolly mammoth. Was it extinction? Or was it something far more unsettling? More than 400,000 years ago, as ice began to slowly sculpt the face of the planet, a creature emerged from the depths of natural history. It wasn't just a big elephant. It was the ultimate evolutionary response to a cooling world where only the most adapted survived. Your name, the original mammoth. But their real names do not fit in the books. Titan of frost, lord of the frozen steppes, shadow of the ice ages. As the leaves fell and the forests retreated to the south, the tundra was born, a hostile and desolate immensity. And there, where no other giant dared to tread, the woolly mammoth thrived. Its body, a prodigy of natural engineering, a layer of fat up to 10 centimeters under the skin, dense fur with up to 3 types of overlapping hair, and small ears designed not to lose heat. Their fangs in a majestic spiral were not just weapons. They were tools for digging through snow in search of hidden herbs, for moving logs, for fighting, and for impressing others. He was not traveling alone. Like its modern relatives, the elephants, the woolly mammoth was a social creature. Huge herds led by experienced matriarchs roamed in migrations covering hundreds of miles, chasing the grasslands that bloomed briefly each summer. Their footprints marked ancestral routes that Paleolithic humans would follow millennia later. But it was not an empty world. Around them, other colossi coexisted and competed. Woolly rhinoceroses, steppe bison, giant deer. A megafauna that seemed like something out of a dream. And lurking in the shadows, pressing from the margins of the ecosystem, a new predator with eyes that shone in a different way. It didn't have fangs or huge claws. His weapon was his mind. Your name. A wise man. The first encounters between humans and mammoths were not recorded with words, but with scars on bones and paintings on stone. Imagine a scene, a small group of hunters, ragged and cunning, watching a herd from a hill. They know they can't attack head-on, but they have learned to read the language of tracks, to predict migration routes, to build traps, to separate young from their mothers. It is a game of patience, calculation, and sometimes suicidal audacity. They didn't just hunt for meat. Mammoths were traveling supermarkets of the Paleolithic, bones to build shelters, fat to fuel lamps, skins to keep warm, tusks to carve tools and art. Humanity not only survived thanks to mammoths, prosperous, but here the first crack in the official story appears, because although hunting was intense, mammoths had been dealing with predators and climate changes for hundreds of thousands of years. Could a few groups of hunters, armed only, with spears and fire, really exterminate these titans so quickly? The question remains planted. What history doesn't tell us is that by then the climate was changing again. The last great ice age was beginning to retreat, slowly opening the door to a new, warmer world. Grasslands disappeared. Migratory routes were cut off. Herds were trapped between frozen deserts and impenetrable forests. But just the weather. Because when we cross archaeological records with the legends of ancient people, a parallel narrative begins to emerge. One that doesn't just talk about survival and climate. It speaks of planned extermination, of ceremonial hunts, of a lost knowledge that maybe, just maybe, played a darker role in the giant's demise. Why are there petroglyphs in Siberia that show mammoths next to human figures in ritual positions? Why did some Arctic shamans talk about the last pack, as if they knew exactly when and how they disappeared? Why are there oral chronicles that describe hunting mammoths not only as a necessity, but as a way to control the very balance of the natural world? Maybe ancient humans knew something we forgot. Or perhaps, as always, the story is told from the perspective of those who survived to tell it. Before continuing, stop for a moment. Imagine those fangs rising against the grey sky, the frozen mist enveloping the herd, the crunching of snow under tons of muscle. And now, imagine the silence. When all that disappeared, too fast, too sudden, what really hastened its end? The world was changing, and it did so with the cruel slowness of geological eras, but with an impact as devastating as the edge of a spear. About 12,000 years ago, the planet staggered out of the last glacial maximum. The glaciers, those miles thick, walls of ice began to retreat. The seas rose, the climate softened. What was once endless tundra was transformed into swamps, forests, and rivers. For woolly mammoths who depended on the cold, dry grasslands of the Mammoth steppes, a vast expanse that connected Europe, Siberia, and North America like an icy bridge. This change was catastrophic. His kingdom fragmented into smaller and smaller islands of suitable habitat. Their herds were isolated, migrations impossible, reproduction difficult. However, this is where the narrative twists again. Because if everything was simply climate change, one would expect a slow, gradual extinction, a decline that would drag on for millennia. But in many places, the disappearance was abrupt, as if something invisible had fallen on those populations with a stroke of a pen. And then we turn our gaze again to humans, because at those same dates, Homo sapiens was expanding its domain across Eurasia and America, armed not only with spears, but with something infinitely more dangerous: complex social organization, symbolic language, intergenerational transmission of knowledge. Where humans arrived, megafauna populations collapsed soon after, and there is still more. Discoveries at archaeological sites such as Dolní Věstonice, in what is now the Czech Republic, reveal entire villages built on mammoth bones, with hundreds of individuals exploited to the core. In the Malta caves, near Lake Baikal, figures sculpted from ivory tusks appear that are not mere amulets. They are maps, astronomical calendars, artifacts that suggest sophisticated knowledge about the cycle of the seasons, and perhaps about the migratory behavior of mammoths themselves. Were prehistoric humans only hunters, or were they ecosystem engineers capable of manipulating the environment and species on a scale we are only now beginning to understand? In fact, some recent theories propose something even more provocative: that humans not only hunted mammoths, but deliberately cornered them and controlled their routes to maximize their use. A kind of de facto domestication without reaching total domestication as with reindeer or dogs. But all manipulation has a price. Overexploiting a resource as slow to reproduce as mammoths was a long-term death sentence. And here, ancient legends once again whisper disturbing clues to us. Among the Yakut and Evenk peoples of Siberia, oral chronicles speak of the smell of Toyon, giant spirits covered in hair that emerged from the bowels of the earth, and that had to be carefully hunted, because once they disappeared, the balance would be broken and the world would fall into disorder. In North America, Inuit legends describe similar creatures called tuktu, whose meat was a gift from the gods, but whose excessive hunting provoked the fury of natural forces. Were these legends simply myths, or distorted echoes of a forgotten reality? And just when we thought the mammoth story ended in a crescendo of melting ice, collapsing ecosystems, and triumphant hunters, an anomaly appears. A place that doesn't fit the narrative. A crack in time. Wrangel Island, located in the East Siberian Sea, more than 140 kilometers from the coast, Wrangel is a windswept wasteland. There, isolated for thousands of years, a small group of mammoths survived. While on the continent, they were just memories. Cave paintings and carved ivory in Wrangel, the mammoths lived, until just 4,000 years ago. To put it in perspective, when the pyramids of Egypt were already rising on the Giza Plateau, when the Sumerians were writing the first cuneiform tablets, when human civilizations were fully entering history with capital letters, there were still living mammoths walking on that island, Why did they survive so long there? Was it the absence of humans? Was it a miraculous microclimate? Or was it something else? The existence of the last mammoths in Wrangell not only challenges what we believed about their extinction. If they survived for so long in an isolated corner, is it so far-fetched to think that in other, even more remote corners, some unknown lineages have remained alive, hidden from the gaze of history? The crack opens, doubt creeps in, and the question is now inevitable: did we really see the last mammoth? Imagine this: a frozen, silent tundra, the wind carrying the snow as if it were the ashes of time. Now listen, not the whisper of the wind, but a low, deep creak, like the wail of a moving mountain. In front of you, against the white haze, emerges the enormous silhouette of a woolly mammoth. Its curved fangs look like scimitars that tear the horizon. His thick, dark fur flutters with every step. His eyes, intelligent, melancholic, do not look only at the present. They seem to remember 1,000 winters. Modern science does not need to resort to fantasy to know what they were like. Discoveries in Siberia, Alaska, and Canada have revealed whole frozen bodies, so well preserved that their stomachs still contained grasses and flowers from thousands of years ago. In 2013, the discovery of Yucca, a young mammoth of about 6 years old, stumped scientists. Her skin intact, her organs preserved, and something more disturbing, marks on her bones that suggested humans had hunted and cut her, just before the ice sealed her body like a message buried in a bottle of time. Genetic analyses of these remains revealed a genome so complete that some scientists, such as those from the team led by George Church at Harvard, dared to do something unthinkable: talk about resurrection. Using gene editing techniques such as CRISPR, they inserted mammoth genes, responsible for their fur, subcutaneous fat, and adaptation to cold, into Asian elephant cells, their closest relative. The goal was not to bring back an identical mammoth, but to create an elephant-mammoth hybrid, adapted to cold climates, that could be released in ecosystems such as the Siberian tundra to combat climate change by reversing desertification. A plan that sounds like science fiction, but is already underway. And here again the narrative becomes complicated, because while science seeks to recreate the mammoth, what if it never completely disappeared? Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, testimonies have emerged, often discarded, from hunters, explorers, and indigenous people who speak of giant creatures covered in hair that move through the most inaccessible areas of Siberia, Alaska, or the Yukon. In 1920, French explorer Bernard Heuvelmans collected dozens of these stories for his monumental work on cryptozoology. In 1948, a Soviet aviation pilot claimed to have seen 2 huge furry animals from the air crossing a river in Chukotka, leaving footprints the size of truck tires. Even in the 1990s, Evenk tribesmen recounted encounters with kelkoi, elephant-like beasts that inhabit the forgotten valleys beyond the Indigirka River. Official science has always been skeptical, and rightly so. There are no fresh remains, no irrefutable photographs, no modern DNA. But the shadow of doubt persists, fueled by a disturbing detail. The largest and least explored Siberian region, the taiga and tundra of the Russian Far East, remains in the 21st century a territory the size of Western Europe, with fewer than 50,000 scattered human inhabitants. Its access is so difficult that even with modern technology, vast areas remain practically virgin. History is littered with examples of species considered extinct for centuries that suddenly reappeared. The coelacanth, a fossil fish found alive in 1938. Hiokapi, a relative of the giraffe rediscovered in the Congo in 1901. Or the Wandiwoi tree kangaroo, rediscovered in Papua in 2018 after 90 years without sightings. If these animals could fool our gaze for so long, why not a mammoth? Furthermore, the woolly mammoth was not a brainless giant. Its brain was even larger than that of modern elephants. They moved in complex herds, led by veteran females who taught them migratory routes, food sources, and defense strategies. They communicated with low-frequency sounds that traveled miles underground, like modern elephants. His sense of smell was prodigious. If a species had the ability to avoid human contact, To merge with the most inhospitable landscape on the planet, it would be precisely a descendant of the mammoth. And then the question transforms. It's not just do they still exist, but what if they never wanted to be found? Here the story folds on itself, because while scientists try to revive the mammoth from the laboratories, is it possible that nature, silent and cunning, has already preserved a living lineage without our intervention? The traces, the legends, the genetic anomalies, everything points to a deeper mystery that we still do not dare to unravel. And now, another crack appears. Because what happened to the mammoths was not just a matter of biological survival. It was a cultural collision that left indelible marks in the memory of humanity. But what brands, and above all, what do they mean? The first time a human being came face to face with a woolly mammoth, Earth was a place that would seem alien to us today. There were no cities, no temples, no books, just ice, rock, and nameless vastness. And yet, what was born from that encounter was not just hunting, it was myth. It is no coincidence that mammoths appear engraved in the oldest caves we know of. In Chauvet, in the south of France, there are images of mammoths from more than 30,000 years ago, traced with charcoal and iron, oxide with astonishing precision. Its outlines are not just drawings, they are bows. It is as if those archaic humans knew that they were not facing a simple animal, but rather something that transcended hunger and survival. The mammoth was not just meat and skin. It was a symbol of power, of resistance, of immortality in the face of ice. His figure became an archetype that crossed cultures and millennia. In Siberia, the Evenk and Yakut peoples believed that mammoth bones were the remains of an underground animal that died when rising to the surface. They called those colossi Olgoi Korkoi, the giant worms of the earth. Meanwhile, in ancient China, fossilized mammoth tusks were confused with dragon bones used in medicinal potions for longevity. Even Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote about bones of colossi found in Scythia, without knowing that he was talking about extinct mammoths. But while myths flourished, reality collapsed. The extinction of the woolly mammoth was not a sudden event. It was a long and agonizing twilight. Its range, which extended from Western Europe to North America, began to fragment about 12,000 years ago, when the planetary climate warmed after the end of the last ice age. The cold, dry grasslands that supported the mammoths gave way to forests, peat bogs, and ecosystems where they could not feed as effectively. At the same time, a new threat emerged from the shadows: us. With flint harpoons, bone spears, and ingenious traps, human groups perfected coordinated hunting techniques. Mammoths, no matter how colossal they were, could not eternally resist the collective intelligence of small, determined, and hungry groups. There is evidence of systematic hunts, like those found in Seine-et-Marne, France, where dozens of mammoth skeletons were found along with human tools. In North America, cultures Clovis and Folsom. They perfected spearheads so deadly that they could pierce even the thick fur and thick ribs of an adult mammoth. This is where the story takes on a disturbing tone, because some scientists maintain that the last refuge of the woolly mammoth, it was not Siberia or Alaska, but a small island in the Arctic Ocean, Wrangell. Cut off from the mainland by rising sea levels, a tiny group of mammoths survived on Wrangell for another 6,000 years. That is to say, when the pyramids of Egypt were already rising, when the first civilizations wrote on clay tablets, the last mammoths still walked on that lost island, but they were not the same. Genetic studies revealed that these Wrangell mammoths suffered from various harmful mutations, the result of extreme inbreeding and low genetic diversity. Some of these mutations affected their sense of smell, their fertility, even their fur could have changed, becoming lighter or less dense. The last descendants of giants transformed into shadows of what they were. Imagine a hunter from the Bronze Age sailing along the Arctic coasts and coming across a weak, solitary mammoth, its tusks eroded, its gaze lost. Imagine what that man would think. Am I seeing a dying god, or an echo of the past that doesn't know it's doomed? Thus ended the visible history of mammoths. But like any good story, it left loose ends. Because if they survived for so long in Wrangell, isolated and forgotten, is it so far-fetched to think that other small nuclei resisted in remote and unexplored regions? Is it possible that, like their bones scattered across the tundras, the memory of mammoths only sleeps buried, waiting to be unearthed by us again? In each fossil tusk carved by prehistoric humans, in each petroglyph that represents them with careful lines, something more than admiration is perceived. One perceives an obsession, as if we had never accepted its disappearance, as if something deep in our psyche kept whispering, they haven't left yet. But what price are we willing to pay to prove it? Imagine for a moment a laboratory immersed in darkness, only interrupted by the bluish light of flickering screens. On one of those screens, a genetic map unfolds its intricate strands like an arcane scroll. It's not science fiction. It's today. And the code that shines does not belong to any living being of our time. It belongs to a woolly mammoth. The idea of bringing back mammoths, of tearing them out of the millennia-long embrace of extinction, is not a modern delusion. Since 1799, the Russian merchant Osip Shumachov stumbled upon a mammoth carcass. Frozen and perfectly preserved in the Siberian permafrost, humanity has flirted with the fantasy of reviving giants. The tusks intact, the fur still visible, the viscera preserved. Everything seemed like a message from the past, a biological time capsule, as if the animal itself had just taken a long, icy nap. But it was only in recent decades, with the advent of high-precision genetic sequencing, that the dream began to crystallize. Scientists like George Church, from Harvard University, led projects that border the border between the possible and the ethical. Your mission: insert key woolly mammoth genes, those that controlled fur growth, subcutaneous fat, and adaptation, to cold, in cells from Asian elephants, their closest relative. This is not pure cloning, but something more ambiguous, more provocative. Is hybrid species engineering? An elephant with mammoth characteristics, a neo-mammoth. A biological palimpsest that would rewrite the lines of evolutionary time. The arguments in favor are hypnotic. Advocates say a restored herd of mammoths could help combat climate change. In the Siberian tundra, their footprints would compact the snow, allowing the soil to keep the permafrost frozen and preventing greenhouse gases trapped for millennia from being released into the atmosphere. In other words, mammoths would not only return as ghosts of the past, but as saviors of the future. And yet, there is a lingering discomfort, a dull echo that reverberates under scientific emotion. Are we resurrecting a titan, or are we manufacturing a ghost? The genetic code of a mammoth is not a complete recipe. It is a deteriorated manuscript riddled with gaps, blots, and illegible fragments. Any creature born from these experiments will not be a true mammoth. It will be a chimera, a distorted mirror of what once walked under Ice Age skies. And even more so, do we have the right to bring back an extinct animal? To condemn it to live in a world that it no longer recognizes, without its herds, without its ecosystems, without its ancient migrations? Wouldn't it be like waking up a sleeping soldier and sending him onto the battlefield alone? In 2013, in an excavation in Malolyakovsky Island, researchers found a female mammoth with liquid blood still visible under the ice. The news sparked frantic headlines. ADN viable? The covers asked. But the response was more sad than spectacular. Although the cells appeared intact to the naked eye, the DNA was too fragmented for direct cloning. Still, the scientists did not stop. Like modern alchemists, they persist in the search for the perfect molecule, the missing piece, the missing link. And meanwhile, in popular culture, mammoths continue to be resurrected in other ways. In video games, in movies, in documentaries. Even in our minds, they continue to walk on white plains that no longer exist. Because the truth is this: we have never let the mammoth go. It is tattooed in our collective unconscious. In every tale of giants, in every legend of forgotten beasts, there is a glimpse of his silhouette. Perhaps that is why each resurrection attempt is not just an act of science, but a ritual. An exorcism of our guilt for hunting him to the end, a plea to retrace the irreversible. But this is where the loop tightens again, because if we manage to recreate a mammoth, even if it was partial, even if it was incomplete, what would stop us from doing the same with other extinct species? Where do we draw the line between historical correctness and arrogance? An old Greek maxim resonates strongly here. Hybris begat nemesis. Human excess always calls for nature's revenge. And yet, if you had the chance to look into the eyes of a living mammoth, even an imperfect shadow, could you resist? Sometimes things we think are extinct don't really disappear. They just learn to hide better. In 1948, a Soviet geologist named Nikolai Vereshchagin was returning from an exhausted expedition in the heart of the Altai, a remote and forgotten region so far away that it seemed beyond the reach of time itself. Among the stories of the Tuvan shepherds, a legend arose that would have made any armchair scientist smile or any mystery hunter shudder. The elders spoke of Avdaga, a huge creature, covered in long dark hair with fangs that looked like ivory blades curved towards the earth. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a muskox, it was something else, something that shouldn't be there. Throughout the 20th century, rumors like this sprouted like weeds in the most desolate regions of the north. From the island's Wrangel to the hidden valleys of Yakutia, whispers of sightings traveled. Hunters, who said they had seen colossal silhouettes crossing rivers shrouded in fog. Huge trails that appeared and disappeared with the first snowfall. Even a military pilot in the 1960s claimed to have seen from the air a herd of enormous quadrupeds advancing in a row over a remote plain. When he landed and returned to the place, there was nothing. These stories are not so easy to dismiss as simple folk legends. There are historical precedents that fuel uncertainty. The island Wrangel, for example, was home to a small population of woolly mammoths that survived thousands of years after their extinction on the continent. While the large herds disappeared a few years ago, 10,000 years, Wrangel's mammoths were still walking across the tundra until just 4,000 years ago, contemporaries of the pyramids of Egypt. If a species could last so long in isolation, why not consider the possibility of small groups hidden even further away? And this is where the stories get even darker. Some researchers have reviewed records of native Arctic peoples, finding cave paintings and surprisingly detailed oral accounts of creatures identical to mammoths. The Chukchi, for example, have tales of giant fanged beasts that appeared in especially harsh winters when hunting was scarce, and the boundaries between the world of the living and the spirits were blurred. But science, inflexible and cautious, demands physical proof. Recent remains, fresh DNA, clear photographs. None of those elements have emerged. So why don't these stories disappear? Because, like every myth that endures, they are not born only from the need to explain the unknown. They are born from longing, of guilt, of nostalgia. The mammoth is our mirror of the past, a creature that reminds us of the world we lost, a world vaster, wilder, and perhaps more honest. In 2012, a Siberian documentary filmmaker released a blurry video purportedly showing a mammoth crossing a river. The recording went viral, fueling theories, hopes, and skepticism in equal measure. Days later, it was shown that the video was a montage, but the question had already been sown, like a permafrost seed that only needed a spark of heat to germinate. What if it wasn't fake? What if, in some forgotten corner, they still walk? Because if there is one thing that the woolly mammoth has demonstrated throughout history, it is its ability to resist, to survive cataclysms, glaciations, and tireless hunters. Would we really bet everything that there is not in some hidden refuge, a woolly heartbeat waiting to be rediscovered? Maybe great stories never die. They only hide behind veils of ice and oblivion, waiting for someone one day to dare to lift the curtain. And now the question bites you like the polar wind. What if extinction is not the end, but just an interlude? We don't always accept death as an end. Sometimes science becomes a modern spell that attempts to reverse the irreversible. In a frozen laboratory, Yakutsk, Siberia, a test tube vibrates under the dim light. Inside it, microscopic fragments of DNA rest like ashes from an ancient bonfire. They are the genetic remains of a woolly mammoth, older than the cities, older than the pyramids, older even than the idea of written history, and yet not quite dead. For 2 decades, teams of geneticists in Russia, Japan, South Korea, and USA, they have played with a dream that, at any other time in history, would have been branded as heresy: bring the woolly mammoth back to life. The process is not science fiction, is called de-extinction. And at the center of this attempt is an animal that still walks among us, the Asian elephant, closest genetic cousin of the mammoth. Through techniques of CRISPR gene editing, scientists are attempting to insert fragments of mammoth DNA, extracted from bones and tissues frozen for millennia, into modern-day elephant embryos. The goal is not to recreate a pure mammoth, but a hybrid capable of resisting the extreme cold of the Siberian steppes and repopulating lost ecosystems. The geneticist George Church from Harvard University leads one of the most ambitious projects. His plot is not only romantic. According to him, reintroducing mammoths or their hybrids to the tundra could help combat climate change, since by felling trees and compacting snow, they would restore ancient grasslands and slow the thawing of permafrost. But the question is not whether technology allows it. The question is darker and deeper. Should we do it? Some warn of ethical risks. Is it fair to bring an animal back to a world that no longer exists? Could these creatures adapt, or would they suffer in a habitat that has changed drastically? Are we resurrecting a marvel, or manufacturing a monster that will never fit? And yet, the seduction is irresistible. The mammoth represents more than just an experiment. It is a symbol of redemption, an attempt to correct the mistakes of our ancestors, who hunted to extinction a titan that had survived 1,000 natural cataclysms. Ultimately, the resurrection of the mammoth is not just a scientific act, it is an emotional act, because by bringing it back to life, perhaps we are trying to revive something within ourselves, the connection with a world that we let die. But before we get excited about a future of tundras inhabited by reborn colossi, there is a question that we cannot avoid. Are we resurrecting the mammoth, or are we just playing gods with broken fragments of a past we don't understand? Imagine this. Year 1943. The Second World War devours Europe, but on the remote shores of the Mar de Bering, a small group of Chukchi hunters hear an ancient rumor. It is not the echo of cannons or the hum of airplanes. It is something deeper, more primitive. A low and vibrant scream so immense that it seems to be born from the ice itself. They say they saw it. In the distance, in the mists of Wrangel Island, a lonely strip of land lost in northern Siberia, a herd of giant creatures crossed the tundra. They were dark, furry, with fangs that glistened in the dim light. Too big to be bears, too real to be a dream. Woolly mammoths, alive. In the middle of the 20th century, the story seems like a delirium, but it's not the only one. In the decades that followed, travelers, explorers, and even Soviet soldiers reported similar sightings in inaccessible corners of the Russian Arctic, Alaska, and Canada. And the stories don't just come from the modern era. Indigenous legends, both from Siberia and North America, speak of underground beasts that emerge from the frozen lands and disappear without a trace. For the Yakuts, mammoths never really died. They hid underground in an underground world of ice and shadows. Of course, conventional science dismisses these stories as misidentifications, fabrications, or remixes of ancestral myths. According to paleontologists, the last known group of woolly mammoths disappeared from Wrangel Island ago approximately 4,000 years, long after extinction on the continent. And yet, doubts persist. Because, as the Greek historian wrote Herodotus, 2,500 years ago, what man fears to forget, he turns into a legend to be remembered eternally. What if these legends hide a kernel of truth? What if, in the most unexplored corners of the planet, where snow erases footprints and fog hides silhouettes, some mammoths manage to survive, far from the reach of our eager hands? The question burns like a coal hidden under ash. Did we really make mammoths extinct, or did we just lose sight of them? Today, under glass microscopes and laboratories immersed in an electrical hum, something impossible takes shape. Fragments of DNA extracted from frozen mammoths, tissues dormant for millennia, are assembled with the precision of a modern goldsmith. Scientists from Russia, Japan, and the United States They work on a dream that borders on heresy, to bring back the woolly mammoth. It is not cloning, it is genetic resurrection. It is not just science, it is a revenge against oblivion. Imagine for a moment, the Siberian grasslands trembling again under the weight of hairy colossi, their trunks rising in the polar wind, their shadows lengthening under the northern lights. It's not just a fantasy, it's a possibility. The past never dies, just wait. And the final question is simple. Are we ready to live with the giants again?